She wasn't supposed to be there. The most feared man in Seoul hadn't felt anything for a woman in years, and every person in his world had accepted that as fact, until a curvy black maid leaned close in a darkened corridor, her voice barely above a whisper, and said 4 words that cracked something open in him that no bullet, no rival, and no amount of cold discipline had ever touched. Now he's dismantling his entire empire to keep her alive, and she doesn't even know that the moment she whispered those words, she didn't just wake something up in him, she signed both of their names on a target. Welcome to Black in Seoul TV. Please like, share, and subscribe. She left that morning without finishing the East Corridor. He noticed. He noticed the way a man notices everything about the one thing he has stopped being able to ignore. The coffee she had left half made. The shelf with books pulled out and not replaced. The absence of her humming, which had become the sound the penthouse used to prove it was still alive. Min-yi stood in the kitchen for a long time. Then he called Sung-ho and told him to process the university payment regardless. Not as a loan, not as an advance, as an anonymous foundation grant. Sung-ho went quiet on the line. Then, carefully, should I attach a name to the donor record? Min-yi's answer was flat and final. No. The call ended. He went back to his desk and told himself that was the end of his involvement in Mary Adami's life beyond what was professional. He was wrong. He was spectacularly, completely wrong. The following morning she arrived at 7 as usual, signed the time sheet, picked up her caddy, went directly to the East Corridor to finish what she had left. She did not mention the money, neither did he. But when she passed the kitchen and found a fresh cup of coffee waiting, exactly the way she took it, she stopped walking. 1 full second of stillness. 1 breath she did not mean to release audibly. Then she picked up the cup and kept moving. He was behind the half-open office door. He turned back to his screen. The same paragraph he had been reading for 20 minutes looked exactly as foreign as it had the first time. By the end of the week, the anonymous grant had processed. Mary's brother sent her a voice note so overwhelmed with relief that she sat on the floor of the supply closet and pressed the phone to her chest and stayed there for 4 minutes. She did not know who had sent it. She suspected. She did not ask. Some things in her life had always been given in the language of action, and interrogating them too loudly broke what was still fragile. That evening she left a single white flower from the lobby arrangement on the kitchen counter where the coffee had been. No note, just the flower. Min-yi found it at midnight when he came for water. He stood looking at it longer than any reasonable person looks at a flower. Then he put it in a glass and carried it to his desk. Sung-ho arrived the next morning, saw it, and became intensely interested in his own shoes. The danger arrived, as it always did in Min-yi's world, without introduction. A man named Director Woo had been watching the Yisung organization for months with the patience of someone who understood that the best time to strike a restructuring empire was during the transition, when weapons were being traded for legitimacy, and legitimacy had not yet fully arrived. Woo operated through clean fronts and dirty connections, and had the particular invisibility of men who had never once been the loudest person in any room. His first move came on a Tuesday. 2 of Min-yi's legitimate real estate holdings were hit simultaneously with fabricated regulatory violations. Inspectors arrived with paperwork that looked official and wasn't. Both businesses shuttered temporarily. The message required no translation. Your clean hands are not armor. Min-yi sat across from 3 attorneys in the penthouse dining room that afternoon and worked through the response with the focused stillness of a man who had survived worse and intended to survive this. Mary was in the library. He was aware of her the way he was always aware of her. The way you are aware of the one frequency in a room of noise that your body has decided matters. What he did not know was that Woo's people had been watching the penthouse too, and they had found the one thing they were looking for. Not a weapon, not a weakness in the organization. A person. A woman who arrived every morning at 7 with a cleaning caddy and no agenda, and had somehow, in a matter of months, become the only variable in young Min-yi's life that his legendary control did not fully cover. Later that night, after the attorneys had gone, Min-yi was at the piano. He played without deciding to, his hands finding the music the way they found all difficult things. He did not hear the door until it had already opened. For a man like young Min-yi, he didn't have the luxury to fall in love with anyone. He longed for it, sought desperately for it, but he knew the risk, the cost, the dangers it would have on his empire. Now he is about to choose his heart or his empire. Will he lose everything for a maid who sees through his head shell and accepts him, or will he let her go? Hit that subscribe button and let's find out. Mary stood in the doorway in her coat, bag on her shoulder, about to leave. She had come to say goodnight, which she had started doing recently, quietly, without ceremony. But she had heard the piano and stopped. She stood listening with an expression she did not know he could see reflected in the dark window glass. He kept playing. Something in the piece shifted without his instructing it to, became less about endurance and more about being heard. She stayed until the last note dissolved into the room's silence. Then, softly, from the doorway, "That was the saddest, beautiful thing I've ever heard." He turned on the bench. She was looking at him with that complete, unhurried directness that always made him feel like every wall he owned had become transparent. He told her it was a piece about waiting for something you were not certain was coming. She held his gaze for a long moment, something moving through her expression that she did not fully close off in time. Then she said goodnight and left. He sat at the piano for another hour. He did not play a single note. A few days later, the twist came from a direction nobody anticipated. Mary's phone was cloned. A professional job, executed during the 20 minutes her bag sat in the supply closet while she worked the library. Someone had been inside the building. Someone who knew her schedule, knew the closet location, and had bypassed the main security desk through the service corridor. The clone was designed to track her movements and intercept her communications in real time. Hunwoo, Minyi's technology specialist, found it during a routine network sweep on Thursday morning. Every device connecting to the building's Wi-Fi was automatically scanned. The clone's signal appeared like a cold fire in an otherwise clean system. Hunwoo brought the report to Minyi at 11. Minyi looked at it. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. The temperature in the room did not change. Everything else did. He found Mary in the east corridor. He stood at the end of it and said her name once. She turned, read his face immediately, and set down her cloth without being asked. He told her plainly what had been found. No softening, no protective vagueness. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for one breath. Then steadily, "How long?" 3 days, he told her. She nodded the way she nodded when she was absorbing something she refused to let flatten her. Then, "What does it mean?" It meant someone was using her proximity to him as leverage. It meant she had become a target through no fault of her own, purely because of what she had quietly become to him. The knowledge moved between them in the corridor like a third presence neither of them had invited, and neither of them was stepping away from. He told her he was moving her to a secure property while the source was traced. Mary looked at him with the full, unhurried force of everything she was. "I am not going anywhere." He took a breath. "This is not a discussion." She crossed her arms. "You're right, it's not, because I already made my decision." He stepped closer. She did not move. He dropped his voice to something quiet and entirely sincere. "I am not trying to control you. I am trying to keep you alive. There is a difference." She held his gaze for a long moment, something flickering behind her eyes that was not stubbornness but something far more complicated. Then, "Find them first. Then we talk." He studied her face. Then he nodded once and pulled out his phone. The trace took 36 hours. Hunwoo followed the clone signal backward through 3 proxy servers to a shell company that dissolved on paper into nothing, but left one digital fingerprint pointing directly to Director Wu's network. Minyi sat with this information for exactly 1 hour before moving. Reaction without thought was how men in his position got buried. He considered every angle, every move, every person in the radius of what he was about to do. Then he made 3 calls. His attorney, a federal investigator he had cultivated carefully over 4 years, a journalist who owed him a significant favor and had the platform to destroy a reputation before the sun set. He did not touch Wu directly. He dismantled him from every legitimate direction simultaneously. The fabricated regulatory violations were reversed with documented evidence of origin, which implicated Wu's inspectors, which opened a federal inquiry, which cracked a door Wu had spent 15 years keeping sealed. By Friday evening, Director Wu's name was in 3 major newspapers next to words that no amount of money recovers from. Mary found out Saturday morning. She arrived to find Minyi at the dining table looking like a man who had not slept but had finished something that required everything. She sat across from him, studied his face, did not ask what he had done or how, just quietly, "Is it finished?" A single nod. She got up, made coffee for both of them, came back, sat down. They drank it in the morning light without another word for a very long time. It was the most intimate thing that had ever happened in that penthouse, and they both felt it. The complication nobody planned for arrived the following week in the form of a man named Alex, South African journalist, 6 months in Seoul, covering a cultural exchange feature. He came into the Foundation's community outreach office, where Mary had taken on volunteer coordination, and he was charming and curious and brought good coffee and asked the kind of questions that showed he had done his research. He came back the next day, and the day after that. Mary was warm and professional and gave him exactly what the story required. She mentioned it to Minyi in passing one evening. A journalist covering the Foundation, good visibility, seemed thorough. Minyi's response was a single question delivered with perfect neutrality. "His name," she told him. He nodded and returned to his documents. Sung-ho had a full background report on Alex within 4 hours. Minyi read every page, found nothing threatening, put it in the drawer, then sat at his desk for 7 minutes doing absolutely nothing, which was 6 minutes and 55 seconds longer than Young Minyi ever did nothing without purpose. The moment Mary came in, dangers never stopped lurking. Young Minyi lost his edge, lost his focus, and his enemies used this to get to him. He could have pushed away like he did the rest. He could have let her go, but no, is she worth the fight? Will he experience true love? Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned. The following Thursday, he arrived at the Foundation office unannounced. "Routine security review," he told Sung-ho. He walked in to find Mary at her desk laughing at something Alex had said. Genuinely laughing, head back, completely unguarded, the laugh she kept for moments she thought only penthouse walls witnessed. Alex was leaning on the desk beside her with the easy posture of a man who believed he was making progress. Minyi stopped in the doorway for exactly 2 seconds. Then he crossed the room, shook Alex's hand with immaculate courtesy, asked 2 precise questions about the article's scope and publication timeline. Established, without raising his voice or altering his expression, that he knew this Foundation and every person in it with a depth that left no room for comfortable assumptions. Then he turned to Mary and told her he needed 5 minutes for the security review. Alex gathered his things with gracious speed and left. Mary looked at Minyi. Minyi looked at Mary. The office held its breath. She crossed her arms slowly, knowingly. His name from her mouth carried a full paragraph of meaning in 2 syllables. He maintained his expression. "There was a security concern." She tilted her head. "There was no security concern." A pause. "There could have been." She studied him for a long moment. Then the corner of her mouth moved in that way it moved when she found something both frustrating and entirely too compelling. "Minyi," he held her gaze. "You came here because of him." Silence. "That is either very sweet or very territorial, and I have not decided which." His response was quiet and completely straight-faced. "Take your time." She laughed, not the head-back version, something quieter and more specific, aimed entirely at him. He left 20 minutes later, having reviewed nothing. Sung-ho, waiting at the car, looked at his face and opened his notebook and wrote 4 words, then underlined them twice. The night everything broke open arrived on a Wednesday with no warning. Mary was leaving the Foundation office late, past 9, because a survivor she had been supporting had called in crisis, and she had stayed 2 hours on the phone and 1 more in person. She walked out into the Seoul night tired in the deep particular way that comes from giving the best of yourself to someone who desperately needed it. She was thinking about the woman she had just left. She was not thinking about the black car that had been sitting across the street for 40 minutes. 2 men, practiced and silent. She was inside the car before her mind had fully caught up to her body. Her phone hit the pavement outside. The door closed. The car moved. She did not scream. Screaming was for people who had not yet decided what to do. Mary was already deciding. She cataloged everything. The men's faces, the route, the turns, the smell of the car. The fact that they had not covered her eyes, which meant either they were careless or they did not intend for her to be in a position to describe them to anyone later. Neither option was comforting. But fear, she had learned long before Seoul, was information, not instruction. The warehouse smelled like industrial solvent and old concrete. They walked her to a chair in the center of a space that was empty except for a table, two more men, and a phone on the table facing her. She sat. She kept her breathing even. She looked at the phone. The screen lit up. A face she did not recognize. Older, composed. The particular composure of men who have done terrible things for long enough that the terrible things no longer require effort. He looked at her the way people look at objects they are considering using. "You are closer to young Minyi than anyone has been in years." The voice through the phone was smooth and deliberate. "That makes you valuable, or it makes you a message. Which one depends entirely on him." Mary held the man's gaze through the screen. Her hands were in her lap, still. "And if I'm neither?" The man on the screen smiled. It did not reach anything. "Then you are very unlucky." She said nothing else. She was thinking. She was also in the part of herself that she kept very quiet and very separate from fear, furious. At the penthouse, Minyi's phone buzzed at 9:47 with a message from Sung-ho. 2 words, "Call immediately." He was already calling before he had finished reading. Sung-ho's voice was controlled in the way it got controlled when controlling it required effort. The foundation office security camera, Mary leaving, the car, the phone left on the pavement. Minyi listened without speaking. When Sung-ho finished, there was a silence on the line that lasted 4 seconds. Then, very quietly, "Find her." What followed was not chaos. It was the opposite of chaos. It was young Minyi operating at the frequency he reached only when something he could not afford to lose was at stake. Every resource, every contact, every favor owed across a decade of careful relationship management deployed in a single direction. Hunwoo traced the car through Seoul's traffic camera network in 40 minutes. The warehouse district in Mapo, Building 7. He had the location in under an hour. He did not send his men ahead. He went himself. Sung-ho did not argue. He had seen Minyi's face. They moved at 11. 6 men, clean and quiet. Minyi in the center of it wearing the particular stillness that meant every calculation had already been completed, and what remained was execution. The warehouse was breached from 2 points simultaneously. It took 4 minutes. Nobody died. 4 men were restrained. The phone on the table was still connected when Minyi walked through the door, and the face on the screen saw him coming and went the color of old ash. Minyi picked up the phone. He looked at the screen for a moment. Then he said one sentence. Quiet, absolute. The kind of sentence that does not need to be repeated or explained because every word in it carries its own weight. He ended the call. He turned. Mary was standing from the chair, her arms crossed, her chin level, her eyes bright with something that was not tears but lived in the same neighborhood. She looked at him crossing the warehouse floor toward her. She looked at his face, which was doing something she had never seen it do before, something unguarded and urgent and entirely unmanaged. He stopped in front of her. Close. He looked at her the way you look at something you almost lost before you fully understood you had it. "I'm fine." Her voice was steady. Remarkably, genuinely steady. Something moved through his expression that was too large and too real for the controlled architecture of his face to contain. Without calculation, without strategy, he pulled her into him. Both arms, complete. She went still for one breath. Then she pressed her face against his chest and closed her eyes and let herself be held by the one person in Seoul who had moved every mountain available to him to be standing in this warehouse at this moment. They stayed like that for a long time. Nobody in the room said anything. Later that night, back at the penthouse, the debrief was quiet and thorough. The man on the phone screen had been identified. A remnant of Wu's network, a lieutenant who had survived the collapse and decided that revenge through leverage was his path back to relevance. He was in federal custody by midnight, the 4 men from the warehouse with him. Sung-ho handled the documentation. Hunwoo wiped every trace of Mary's name from the incident report. She was listed as an unidentified civilian witness. Protected. Minyi found her in the guest room at 2 in the morning. The door was open. She was sitting on the window bench with her knees drawn up, looking at Seoul. He knocked on the open door. She looked over. He came in and sat in the chair across from her, and they looked at each other in the dark with the city lighting the space between them. "Came yourself?" It was not a question. He looked at her steadily. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "You didn't have to do that." Something shifted in his expression. "Yes," he repeated. "I did." She looked at him for a long time, long enough that whatever she was measuring, she finished measuring it. Then, softly, "Why?" He did not look away. Because you are not a resource or a liability or a variable. You are the reason the piano sounds different. You are the reason the penthouse is different. You are the reason I am different. A pause. And I should have told you that before tonight instead of leaving you to figure it out from coffee cups and anonymous grants. The room was very quiet. Mary uncurled from the window bench and sat with her feet on the floor and her hands in her lap, looking at him with that expression she had when she was deciding something important. Minyi, I need you to understand something. He waited. I did not come to Seoul to be saved. I came to build something. I am still building it. Whatever this is between us, it cannot swallow that. I will not disappear into your world the way women disappear into powerful men's worlds and become decorative and silent. He held her gaze without flinching. I know. She searched his face. Then what are you offering? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, Young Minyi looked like exactly what he was underneath everything. A man, just a man. I'm offering to stand next to you while you build it, not in front of you, not behind you. Next to you, as an equal. The words landed in the room and stayed there. She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her chest, something she had been keeping carefully managed since the corridor, since the coffee, since the flower, since every quiet morning and every charged silence, released. Slowly, like a breath held for too long finally allowed to leave. You have terrible timing, Mary told him. He almost smiled. I know. She stood. He stood. The space between them was small and full of everything they had been circling for months. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. She reached up and put her hand flat against his chest, over his heart, the way she had pressed her hand against the warehouse wall hours ago, but different now. Intentional. A choice. His hand came up and covered hers. Neither of them moved for a long moment. What happened next belongs to them. The city watched from outside the windows. The penthouse held its breath. And somewhere in the space between two people who had chosen each other the hard way, something that had been building since a rainy Tuesday and a darkened corridor, and 3 impossible words finally arrived at the place it had always been heading. She was gone when he woke. The guest room door open. Bed made with a precision that told him she had been awake for a while before she left. His chest tightened. He moved through the penthouse quickly, checking rooms, already reaching for his phone. The note was on the kitchen counter, next to the coffee maker. One line in her handwriting, clean and direct. I need a day, not running, thinking. I'll be back tomorrow at 7. He stood with the note in his hand for a long time. Then he put it carefully in his jacket pocket and made himself coffee and sat at the dining table and stared at the city and waited, which was the hardest thing Young Minyi had done in years. She came back at 7, exactly at 7. He was at the dining table when she walked in. She signed the time sheet, picked up her caddy. Then she set it back down and walked to the table and stood across from him. I thought about everything you said. He waited. I thought about the corridor, the coffee, the flower, the grant, the warehouse. A pause. I thought about the piano. Something moved in his expression. She held his gaze. I'm not afraid of who you are. I'm afraid of what happens if I give you everything, and you decide one day that this was a chapter and not the whole book. The honesty of it hit the room like weather. He stood. He came around the table and stopped in front of her, close enough that the warmth between them was real and present and required acknowledgement. Mary. His voice was low. Look at me. She looked. I have spent my entire adult life deciding what to keep and what to release, what has value and what is temporary. He reached up and very carefully, with the precise deliberateness of a man who does nothing without intention, tucked one loose coil of her hair back from her face. I know the difference, and I am telling you, with everything I am and everything I have built and everything I have broken and rebuilt, that you are not a chapter. She closed her eyes for one breath. When she opened them, she was decided. She had been decided probably for longer than tonight. Then we do this right, Mary told him. No hiding, no half measures. If we're in this, we're in it. He looked at her with something in his face that was new and permanent and entirely without the cold armor the rest of Seoul was given. We're in it. She picked up her caddy and went to work. He went back to his table, but the penthouse sounded different that morning. Fuller, like something that had been missing from the frequency had finally come home. The weeks that followed were the quietest and most complicated of both their lives in the best possible way. They were not loud about what they were. They did not perform it, but it was visible in the small architecture of shared mornings and the way the penthouse had rearranged itself around 2 people instead of 1. her books on his shelves, his coffee preference memorized and never discussed. The piano played at nights for an audience of one who sat on the library floor with her back against the couch, and her eyes closed, and listened like the music was something she needed to eat. Sung-ho, who had been with Min-yi for 11 years, told his wife one evening that his boss had become a human being, finally, properly, and his wife said it was about time. But peace in Min-yi's world was always temporary, and the next threat came not from outside, but from inside, in the form of a man named Chairman Beek, the eldest and most conservative member of the Yisung organization's original founding circle. A man who had watched Min-yi restructure the organization toward legitimacy with the quiet fury of someone watching an inheritance being dismantled. And who had, upon discovering the identity of the woman in the penthouse, decided that the combination of a legitimate business push and a foreign black woman with influence over the organization's leader represented a threat to everything he had spent his life building. Chairman Beek did not use warehouses or phone clones. He used newspapers. A story appeared on a Thursday morning across 2 major Seoul publications. Unnamed sources close to the Yisung organization claimed that a foreign national with unknown connections had been given inappropriate access to confidential business operations. The story was vague enough to be legally untouchable and specific enough to be unmistakably about Mary. The photograph they used was from the Foundation's public website. Her name was not printed, but her face was there. Mary found out from a colleague at the Foundation who sent her the link with 3 question marks. She read it at her desk. She read it twice. Then she sat very still for a moment. She was not fragile. She had been talked about before. She had been the subject of other people's narratives before. But there was something particular about being weaponized against a person you loved, about being turned into a liability aimed at someone who had already lost too much. That was the part that made her eyes burn. She called Min-yi, not Sung-ho, him directly. He picked up on the second ring. "I saw it," he told her before she could speak. "I'm handling it." She took a breath. "Min-yi, who did this?" A pause that told her he already knew. "Come to the penthouse, I'll explain everything." She came at noon. He was waiting. Sung-ho was there, 2 attorneys. He told her about Chairman Beek, about the internal resistance to his restructuring, about the faction that saw her not as a person, but as a symbol of everything they wanted to reverse. He told her plainly and completely, and without softening any of it, because she had asked him once to never protect her from the truth, and he had meant it when he agreed. She listened to everything. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, then she looked at him directly. "What are you going to do?" He held her gaze. "Remove him, legally, completely, permanently. He has been diverting organization funds for years. I have documentation. I have been waiting for the right moment." She searched his face. "You were protecting him before this." Min-yi's expression was careful. "I was maintaining stability. There is a difference." She looked at him for a long moment. And now, his voice was quiet and entirely certain. Now he touched something he should not have touched. Chairman Beek's removal from the organization's board was announced the following Monday, accompanied by a federal referral for financial misconduct. The newspapers that had printed the original story received documented corrections and printed retractions by Wednesday. The Foundation released a formal statement about Mary's role that was so clearly supported by public record that the original narrative collapsed under its own lack of foundation. By Friday, Mary's inbox was full of messages from other women who had been similarly targeted by similar stories and wanted to know how she had done it. She spent the weekend writing back to every single one of them. Min-yi watched her do it from across the table. He watched her with the expression Sung-ho had once tried to describe to his wife and eventually given up on because there was no accurate professional language for it. It was the expression of a man who had spent his entire life building walls, understanding for the first time what it felt like to want to build something else instead. On a Sunday evening in late autumn, when Seoul was lit gold and the penthouse was warm and Mary was on the library floor with her back against the couch and her eyes closed while he played, Min-yi stopped mid-piece. She opened her eyes. He was turned on the bench, looking at her with something in his face she had not seen before, something that was past the want and past the protection and past even the love, something that looked like a rival. Like a man who had been traveling toward something for a very long time and had just understood he was already there. He came and sat beside her on the floor. She looked at him. He reached into the pocket of his shirt and opened his hand. The ring was simple and considered, and exactly the kind of thing she would have chosen herself, which meant he had been paying attention to her for longer and in more specific ways than she had fully measured. She looked at it. She looked at him. He said nothing. He did not need to. The question was in every week and every morning and every cup of coffee and every note he had ever played knowing she was listening. She took the ring from his palm. She turned it once in her fingers. Then she looked at him and said, "I told you I'd pay you back." He looked at her with absolute confusion. She held up the ring. "Turns out I pay in decades." The laugh that came out of him was the realest thing she had ever heard from a man who had spent years treating laughter as a liability. She slid the ring onto her own finger. He pulled her into him and pressed his face into her hair, and held her with the particular completeness of someone who has just been given back something they did not know had been missing until it was there. 6 months later, they were married in a ceremony that was small and private and entirely theirs. No performance. No audience beyond the people they had chosen. Sung-ho cried and denied it completely. Hunwoo spent the reception explaining the denial algorithm for video footage to anyone who would listen. Mary's brother flew in from Lagos and shook Minyi's hand for a very long time without speaking, which communicated more than an hour of words would have. On a quiet morning 4 months after that, Mary came and sat across from Minyi at the dining table where he was reading, and she folded her hands on the table in the way she folded them when she had already fully thought through what she was about to say. He looked up. She looked at him. She waited 1 beat then. "We're going to need a different room." He looked at her. She did not look away. He set down his document very slowly. He looked at her hands folded on the table. He looked at her face. He stood up and came around the table and crouched in front of her and took her hands in both of his and held them the way he held everything that mattered. Like it was the most important thing he had ever been trusted with. "How long?" His voice was barely above a sound. 11 weeks. He pressed his forehead to her hands. She put her palm on the back of his head and closed her eyes. Outside, Seoul moved and breathed and went on being entirely indifferent. Inside the 42nd floor of the Murray Tower, a man who had been told his whole life that coldness was strength sat on the floor of his own kitchen holding the hands of a woman who had walked into his penthouse with a cleaning caddy and no agenda, and had made him hard in every way that actually counted. Hard enough to be soft. Hard enough to be present. Hard enough to be a father. Hard enough to be real. And the city shone below them, and the piano waited in the library, and Mary hummed something low and unhurried in the quiet of the morning, and this time he did not pretend he wasn't listening. If you enjoyed the story, hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications for more.